the Eye of Thoth. The relationship between the Great Sphinx and Atlantis. According to some theories, the Sphinx is a relic of various astronomical phenomena carved in stone. Many associate it with the once sunken island continent, Atlantis. In contrast, we have vastly different information that puts the identity of the builders of the Great Sphinx of Giza and the purpose of this statue colossus in a completely different light. But let's start our story at the beginning. It may seem very logical to connect Atlantis and the Great Sphinx of Egypt to each other, especially in light of the fact that the supernatural knowledge of Atlantis was inherited by Egypt. According to this theory, our planet was hit by a huge flood 13,000 years ago. According to ancient records, fire and water floods regularly destroy certain civilizations in the history of our planet. We can therefore accept that, as well as the fact that it was possible to prepare for this. The last such great flood occurred approximately 13,000 years ago. The Atlantean priests, who watched over time, foresaw this, so they prepared for all the overwhelming cataclysms. According to the hypothesis, the Great Sphinx was part of this culture-saving plan and symbolized it. In other words, its shape symbolizes the constellations Leo and Hercules. The latter is also known as the constellation Heracles. And as such, it is the fifth largest constellation out of the 48 stars listed by Ptolemy. Its importance is exemplified by nothing better than the fact that it is one of the 88 constellations known and recognized today. The Great Sphinx, therefore, with the body of a lion and the pharaoh's felt-bearing head, commemorates the end of a cosmic cycle and the beginning of a new evolutionary era. It's called Zep-Tepi, also known as first time. The commentators of this theory support their idea by linking each developmental epoch to the precession motion of the Earth. For a better understanding, here are some quotes from our book Initiations of the Gods, the Egyptian Mystery Schools. The Zep-Tepi and the Alternation of World Eras. In order to properly appreciate the ingenuity of the Egyptians and learn about the true past of their culture, we need to touch on the alpha of their outlook on life. So, let's get acquainted with the concept of Zep-Tepi. The spiritual tradition reports that the first date was Zep-Tepi, that is, the first time, the beginning of creation. This is called the 0 hour of post-flood civilization. From Zep-Tepi dates the new spiritual evolutionary era of all mankind. The Great Sphinx is, in a sense, the first milestone of this journey. When did the last great flood happen? This worldwide catastrophe took place about 13,000 years ago. This cataclysm has survived in all the cultural traditions and mythologies of the planet. Egyptian priests had records of similar disasters in the past. One of these commemorates the beginning of Atlantis, which dates back tens of thousands of years. Based on this knowledge, the ancient builders were well aware that every cosmic year the great destructions return cyclically. From the motions of the stars, one can read the duration of each spiritual evolution cycle and the dates of the great epoch changes. The Great Sphinx also commemorates this cosmic cycle. From a spiritual point of view, every evolutionary era lasts 25,920 years. This is usually the amount of time that various souls have to traverse a large cycle of development. This is considered a cosmic world year. At the end of each such cycle, global changes take place, floods of fire and or water, the periodicity of which was already known to Egyptian priests and Atlantean forefathers. These changes were regarded not as frowns of fortune or scourges, but as destructive and renewing manifestations of the order of life. Ultimately, the world order is restored at the end of each cosmic cycle, so great changes, even the cataclysms themselves, are necessary and inevitable. Let's quickly add that this does not mean annihilation for immortal souls, only that they can try themselves in another caste on Earth or elsewhere. Within the large world year, the Egyptians also distinguished 12 sub-eras or cycles, that is, periods of 2,160 years, to which various stellar effects were associated. Each era was given a name according to its own dominating, characterful star effect. According to which constellation the Earth's axis movement pointed towards, the main constellations of the zodiac as we know it today were matched by a sub-era. The order is deliberately reversed, as the Earth's axis seems to travel through the sky in this way, after Aries, Pisces, then Aquarius, and so on. The other zodiac signs follow one another. One of the series of stars, and thus the nature of the astral and ethereal energies radiating to the Earth and humanity, is given by the 12 signs of the zodiac. Together, they make up the total turn of 360 degrees. The 12 traditional constellations are mainly named after animals. This is the zodiac. The age of the constellation Leo fell between 10,940 to 8,780 BC, the age of Cancer 8,780 to 6,620 BC, the age of Gemini 6,620 to 4,460 BC, the age of Taurus 4,460 to 2,300 BC, the age of Aries 2,300 to 140 BC, the Pisces era 140 to 2020 CE, the age of Aquarius 2020 BC according to some calculations. It is important to note that this epoch calculation is not accurate from an astrological point of view, if only because the constellations do not exactly cover 30 degrees in the sky, and there is also an overlap between them, but it gives an approximate sense of the cyclicality of each epoch. Now let's take a look at the theory of the Leo and Orion correlation based on all this. According to some theorists, if we take this chronology coordinated with the sky as a basis, then in the mythical image of the Great Sphinx, humanity lived the spiritual era of the constellation Leo, which began roughly in the 11th millennium BC and lasted a little more than 2,000 years. Adherents of this theory also trace the image of the Sphinx with a lion's body and a man's head back to this, since the lion is a symbol of royal power and domination, while the human head can be interpreted as a reference to human reason. As an astrological note, we can add that the main ruling celestial body of the constellation Leo is the Sun. Thus, the solarity expressed by the Great Sphinx is also clarified. So it's not that, as many believe, the Great Sphinx's eastward-facing gaze was spying on the constellation Leo at the time, but specifically that the retrograde, backward, motion of the vernal equinox fell into the constellation Leo during that period. To elaborate in a little more detail, due to lunar solar precession, the position of the intersection of the celestial equator and the ecliptic, the vernal equinox and the autumn equinox, changes by 50.3 seconds of arc per year. The vernal point, according to the spiritual point of view, travels along the ecliptic in the opposite direction to the movement of the Sun over a period of 25,920 years. This is called the Great, or Cosmic, or Platonic Year, or a World Year. As for the constellation Leo, metaphorically it is the vernal point, and not the solar system, walked in the region of the Leo star group in the 11th millennium BC. Several researchers, based on the Orion correlation theory of Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock, have linked the location of this constellation, the stars of the Orion belt, the stars Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, and the Milky Way to the Zeptepi, with the beginning of time, by matching the orientation of the Great Sphinx, the three Great Pyramids of Giza, and the Nile to the constellation Leo, the constellation of the Orion belt and the Milky Way around 10,500 BCE based on the principle of as above, so below. However, it cannot be emphasized enough that along this logic not one, but several astonishing solutions are given, since the vernal point was not only in the 11th millennium BC, but also in the 37th, 63rd, and 89th millennium BC and so on, in the constellation Leo. Consequently, the mysterious Sphinx builders could create the Sphinx in any of the eras associated with the aforementioned constellation Leo. Above all, the theory fails not at the time horizon, but at the fact that, to the best of our knowledge, it was not Egyptian culture that created the Father of Horror, as the Arabs call the Great Sphinx, but another culture. The mystery of the Leo correlation and the Great Sphinx lies precisely in the mysteries surrounding it. For us, he is the keeper of those energies and information whose existence is incomprehensible to a human mind, yet at a height accessible to human reason and consciousness. In light of all this information, let's get to the relationship between Atlantis and the Great Sphinx. In the first instance, the Great Sphinx connects the spiritually mature man filled in his energies with the Atlantean times. The reason for this is twofold. On the one hand, the statue was built on one of the special energetic nodes of the Earth, and on the other hand, it is not so much the contents of the underground halls and corridors, but rather the gates to higher dimensions, invisible to the physical eye, that are its treasures. When the Great Sphinx is referred to as a gateway through which one can enter the afterlife, a mysterious realm, or a region like heaven, it is actually the possibility of knowing higher worlds and planes of existence for the transcendental consciousness of the initiates. There have been, and still are, privileged periods when Sphinx builders return to make tunings on the energy fields associated with the Great Sphinx. Since these creatures come from outer space, so in some way the researcher can rightly feel that the mysteries of the Sphinx of Giza are associated with stars, constellations, stargates, and extraterrestrials. Yet we cannot state categorically that the Great Sphinx was built solely for the sake of humanity. In fact, we cannot even claim that it was created by humans. We need a much larger approach here. The ancient energies and storehouses of knowledge associated with the Great Sphinx determine the fate of the planet, which extends far beyond the development cycles of a particular species. Only a few of the chosen initiates could communicate with these alien beings. Even very few of the Egyptian pharaohs and high priests were allowed to meet the extraterrestrials in person. So it wasn't enough for someone to be an enlightened person or an ascended master, it took more for someone to be talked to by Sphinx builders. Next time we will continue from here. Have a peaceful and blissful day.